Welcome everybody. We're just waiting for everybody to join. We do have quite a number of registrations, so I can see the participant count ticking up as we wait. So we'll give everybody a few minutes to join and then we'll kick off. Just waiting for some more folks to join. Numbers have sort of started to slow down, so I think we have got most people with us. We'll make sure we stick to time for everybody. Right, I think that looks like the numbers have slowed down a little bit, Andrew. I think from your point of view, we'll start. So, first of all, welcome everybody to today's webinar. Lovely to have you here. As the slide says, my name is Michelle Mulder. I'm a data and AI specialist at Microsoft. I have been working in with our government customers almost my entire 12-year career at Microsoft. Most of that time actually working with local government organisations in some way, shape or form, and more recently in the transport industry. I'm really excited to see some familiar names on the registration list, so nice to see some familiar faces today. So just to talk a little bit about today's webinar, I think it's not a technical deep dive. It's more of a point of view awareness session, and that is ahead of the event on the 23rd in Manchester, which we're all excited for. What we'll be doing today is we'll go into the definition of AI, its newest iteration, which is generative AI. We'll talk about its capabilities, its impact, and the opportunities as they present. And I don't know about you, but when I am taking on a new concept, particularly if it's quite challenging or broad, I do quite like to have the time to reflect and prepare. So what we hope today's session will provide you with is a chance to digest the concepts that we talk about and share today, and that will help you get the most out of the event in a couple of weeks' time. A few housekeeping items. Please make sure that you post the questions, any questions you have, in the Q&A section. We expect the chat to get quite busy, and unfortunately that means questions could be lost. So please use the Q&A section for questions and we'll dive into there. We have about 45 minutes of content, so there is plenty of time for questions at the end, and Andrew and I will pick them up and discuss them as we see them come in. There was some questions that were shared at registration, and we looked at these, and they sort of broadly fall into 4 buckets: skills, a bit about data, security, and then the opportunity that AI presents. So I'm going to hand over to Andrew to introduce himself, and I look forward to facilitating for our time together today. Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and good morning, everybody. I'm going to shortly share some slides on the screen just to support today's presentation. But I've been at Microsoft now for 7 years or so, and working across public sector transport organizations. And the fascinating thing is I haven't seen any particular point in time over the past 7 years as such a fast acceleration in an adoption of a new technology that's come out in a fairly short amount of time. So I'm just going to share my screen here. So that should now be on screen. So very much so in the next 30 to 45 minutes or so, it's going to be quite a rapid view. And I use this slinky as a bit of as a way of describing that we're going to quickly look back, jump forward to what the possibilities around this generative AI and the use of AI is going to look like, and then bring it back to the present, the here and now, and think about how we can capitalize on the opportunity or even understand it. So today's session, as Michelle said, we're not going to go into any level of deep technical aspects of AI, but it's hopefully going to give you a real good broad perception of what this means for yourselves.
Tell the young they can never become what they aspire to. Born in a cell with no one who can inspire.
So it's not like I'm walking on stage to some great music, but the purpose of that little bit of clip was something I took off social media that was put online last year. The voices in that were actually generated through AI. And we're in this place now. There's such a big, massive shift in terms of the way that technology has rapidly come at us over the past 12 months or so, that it's starting to come into everyday life. Certainly over the past 12 months or so, there's been huge amounts of change, and that only compounds over the past few years of the way we've been looking at change across our industry, across our everyday life. But particularly when we think about the use of AI, it's been front and center. You would have seen headlines all over the place. It's coming in at every angle. And from a Microsoft point of view, obviously, we're not alone in that. There are a lot of perspectives around how we're thinking about using AI in everyday life. And it's a real big shift change.
A long, long time ago at Lady Winterbottom's lovely tea party, which is
in the smoking ruins and ashes of New York City,
a fierce woman ain't playing no games and is out to kick some butts.
Against the unimaginable, brutal, merciless, and scary
lobby boy of the delightful Grand Budapest Hotel.
Hi.
And everything seems doomed and lost until
a super handsome man arises, the true hero and great mastermind behind all of this.
That's another short clip that I took off social media last year. Again, the interesting thing about this is this person using a mobile phone, walking around his apartment, recording himself, walking from room to room, and then using some of this new technology to generate everything that you saw on top of that. So if you think immediately about how we can now take and describe something we want to create in simple language, we can now ask the system to generate it. And in the case of that, all the voices, all the background music, all of the content that we saw visually has been generated through the use of this technology. Another example you might have seen early last year was this put onto social media. It's not a real picture of the Pope wearing a puffer jacket, and it caused a lot of sort of discussion in social circles at the time. Obviously, it appeared online, and it's kind of in the forefront of what we're seeing in everyday life now. The way that it can potentially generate content that's extremely lifelike. From a Microsoft point of view, we're hugely optimistic about what this AI opportunity actually means. There's a huge opportunity for us to understand how it can change everyday life. Over the past 12 months, obviously, it's been much more in the front and center of everyday news. You would have heard phrases like ChatGPT or GPT or other phrases like Copilot. And this technology we're really coming to terms with to understand how it can impact our roles, our daily activities, our tasks within those roles, how it can really transform how we do our day-to-day roles. From a Microsoft point of view, we're really committed as part of our core values to really empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more, as an opportunity to use this technology to really change the way that we can think about our everyday life, our everyday work, and the opportunity we can drive for the benefit of all citizens within the UK. As a brief history, we kind of loosely use this term artificial intelligence, but it's actually been around since the 1950s. And since then, when there was a small team of people with a small budget to investigate a particular problem, we've kind of evolved that over time. You would have heard phrases like machine learning and deep learning and neural networks. This concept of using artificial intelligence has really changed shape over the years as we use the benefits of what computer systems can do to crunch large volumes of data, spot patterns, spot anomalies, and use the benefits of these systems to really do things on behalf of us around large computational calculations. We've got this new terminology now called generative AI, and the real shift change here is that we've ended up creating these systems that are very much like the human brain. Before, with a computer, we kind of rely on it to be 110% accurate all of the time. We want to make sure that when we give it a calculation, we get a completely accurate answer every time. And typically, these machines have been built to do things that we're not very good at. We can't hold these large calculations in our heads, so we've built these machines to be able to do this on our behalf. With generative AI, we've generated these new, what we refer to as large language models, large statistical calculations looking over vast volumes of data, which crunches it down and then creates what's inside, we refer to as a neural net. But in a sense, operates very much like in the same of the way of the human brain. When it hears a phrase and you pump data into it, it then uses a probability calculation to then determine what is the next word that, based on all of its learned information about human knowledge, how is the next word going to be presented back to you? So if you ever use these systems, you would have seen these words come back a word at a time. That is essentially this model doing that calculation in real time and predicting what the next word in that sentence is. So when we look at terminology, we've talked about artificial intelligence, which is really using computers to do, generating and manipulating large volumes of data, even recognizing objects and recognizing speech and recognizing things that we're asking these computer systems to do. But these large language models now is a new term that's become front and center, where we've taken a large corpus of information, which is pretty much public information online, analyzed it, assessed it, crunched it down, and produced what we now refer to these LLMs, which underpin the way that we can use these models to then ask it questions and interact with it. If we look over the past sort of 8 years or so, again, AI isn't something new. And from a Microsoft perspective, this is just a few simple examples that show how we've generated services that can understand human speech, understand objects when shown through a camera lens, understand human language understanding. And so we can kind of iterate on this thing. We've not suddenly come to a point and we've opened this magic box and we've suddenly got this new technology. It's an iteration with a new capability that sits on top of a large capability that already existed, but we're now continuing to iterate on that. But in particular, it's worth highlighting that taking the last 3 months or first 3 months of last year as an example, we came to market with huge amounts of innovation. Back in November 2022, ChatGPT was released to the world as a consumer tool. It was opened up on top of the underlying model, and suddenly everybody had access to a chat interface to ask it questions. And it became the fastest growing internet service available to date. I think with something like 1 million users within the first month and 100 million within 3 months. So it's one of the largest consumed services in the history of any service that's been made available online. And from an organizational relationship point of view, kind of to touch on this, that ChatGPT model you would have referred to has come from an organization called OpenAI. They were set up as a research-based organization back at the end of 2015. And their objective really is to understand, what does AGI or artificial general intelligence look like, and how do we research towards that objective? But over that period of time, they've been building these large language models, working in partnership with a number of organizations, but including Microsoft, who made some further investment to partner and really bring the capability of what is available in that stack and bring it into the corpus of how we produce our services that sits on the Azure cloud. So that partnership has been really fundamental to how we're able to then bring to market all of that capability at enterprise scale, with all the considerations around data controls and security and ethical AI. And we'll touch a little bit on responsible AI when we get to that later in the session. But this key piece here is that we're taking and working with a research-based organization to then make these at enterprise scale for everyone to be able to consume. Here's a quick example. If you're not familiar or haven't had a chance to use something like ChatGPT, it's very much a text-based interface where you can ask it a question. And in this example, we ask a question around 3D TVs, and it's in a similar vein. We're now switching the way that we interact with these systems from using a search box where we type in a set of phrases to come up with a set of responses that allow us to dig into websites and follow on content to find our answer. But now it's asking a question and it's providing the response in the first instance. Again, it's a multi-language model. And when we mean multi-language, it's not just human language, it's also computer language. It's kind of seen all of these patterns of large volumes of information to be able to interpret that. So here's an example where I ask it to write a tweet in Japanese as an example, and it's produced that for me. Similarly, it's because it has the context of the language is understood. Essentially, there was a foundational paper released back in 2018, which is referred to as Transformers is All You Need. And the idea here is it was a point in time to understand that semantically, the relationship between words and the way that these words can be interpreted allows essentially the models to respond in a human-like way. So from a simple point of view, when I ask it a question, it feels like I'm talking to another human being. It's essentially coming off, it's determining what is the next word based on the probability of how it's seen by its use by other people across the world, and then responding back to you in that simple language. So it gives the effect of actually looking like an intelligent system. But the key thing here is it is still a statistical model. So it isn't an intelligence in as much it decides itself what to do. It responds to a response from myself, where I ask it a query, and then it responds back by statistically determining what is the right sequence of words I should use. And as we continue this conversation in the ChatGPT interface, again, I can continue to layer on additional questions, additional perspectives. So I've asked now, provide me an itinerary in a particular location, and it remembers what we refer to as the context. As you go through the conversation, you don't have to repeat the phrase you said before. It remembers the context of the conversation as you go through this process. So it already knows I've been talking about Seattle and talking about planning an itinerary. Now I've asked it to write an email on my behalf, and it's taken that previous context and it's continued the output. So again, the step change here is it's not a one-time interaction with the system. It's now a conversation we're having with the system using natural language to come to an endpoint. And we end up having a conversation through this process. I took just before Christmas, and again, we now start to think about, okay, well, this seems quite fun. I can use it for search. What's the real world applications? And so a question was asked by someone on social media just before Christmas, what kind of things are you now using this technology for? So there's a few examples. Again, I snipped from different places. People are using it for, improving the basketball team shifts, thinking about the way they have to bring teams together, helping with kids' homework, or helping with English translation. But the most interesting one on here really is, it's not that I couldn't have done these things myself. It's how fast I now iterate on new ideas and learn new things. So it becomes a new tool in our toolbox as part of that process of assisting how we work on a day-to-day basis, improving the way that we operate as humans. It's not replacing what I'm doing, but it's improving every activity that I could potentially be doing on my computer system. And it's for us to understand the implications of how we can take advantage of that. So I've got another short video just as another example of this.
Artificial intelligence is set to take a mobile phone app that helps blind and partially sighted people to the next level. It'll speed up the way the app helps in many of the everyday decision-making processes, which sighted people take for granted.
At the age of 17, Lucy Edwards lost her sight altogether. Now a bit of tech is helping her picture
voice memos
what she can't see.
Open be my eyes.
Take picture.
Lucy is one of the first in the world to trial an artificial intelligence-powered app.
What's in the fridge? ?
To not only describe the world around her,
Such as eggs, milk, cheese,
but to contextualise it too.
What can I make with these ingredients? ?
Virtual volunteer. There are many dishes you could make with those ingredients, such as an omelette, scrambled eggs, or grilled cheese.
That's so cool.
The app uses ChatGPT, an AI-powered tool which this week was updated to be able to interpret pictures as well as words.
Based on the picture, it seems like the milk expires on the 21st of December, 2023.
It's really good just to, make sure I know that I'm not going to kill myself or anyone else around us by eating mouldy food.
Does it always get it right?
Yeah, I would say 95% of the time. What are the models wearing in the photo?
The models are wearing various outfits from the Chanel Spring/Summer 2003 ready-to-wear collection.
This app makes me cry. I took a photo of a tube map and it told me where to go. I had not been confident on the tube for 10 years and it's doing that. So I can't wait for what else it can do.
The app's been going for 8 years, but previously relied on human volunteers to advise.
As a blind person, it gives me the autonomy not to have to ask for human sighted assistance anymore, and that is massive. Now my phone and me can be independent without anyone else, and that means more to me than anything.
It's not perfect. For example, it can't tell closely related dog breeds apart, and it will often still offer the option to connect with a real-life human. But its developers say it's learning every day and will soon be released for free worldwide.
Imagine that 253 million people in a very short amount of time have better access to the world through this technology. I think that's the promise.
The dress has a mixture of paisley and floral patterns in various sizes.
A blueprint for progress where we can all see the benefits.
Well, did it get it right?
Yeah.
Martin Stew, News at 10.
So I think that's a really pertinent example, and it's something I'm particularly passionate about how we can use this technology for really greater good. That example there is actually an innovation of using these models to not only, as we talked about, using text to interact, but now recognizing images and describing the context of those images. So the next question is then, with all of this idea of we're now generating new content, the idea of generating this information from a few lines of input, what does that actually mean in terms of opportunities for us to understand how it can apply to the services that we may all be looking to deliver? So a few simple examples around chatbots as a simple example, using it for search and response, generating content, summarizing information. We're getting to a point now where even when we want to generate a new application, we can essentially draw the application interface on a piece of paper, take a photo of it, and it can actually ingest it and produce the code for us. So if you think about what that means going forward, if we're now using natural language to ask the computer to do things on our behalf, it actually elevates all of our capabilities in our specific knowledge domains to be able to do new and incredible things. So I'm going to walk through a few simple examples just to kind of set the idea of where these potentially could be used. This is a simple example I built using the careers website at DFT. And typically, if I was interested in looking at what open opportunities there were, naturally I can go to the DFT website. I can explore that site, understand who the organization is, understand their values. But in this case, I've simply pointed it at the careers website using a bot generation technology. And now I can have an example there using the content on that website as grounding or knowledge base for this particular bot. So typically, whenever you're used to, if you've ever built a chatbot in any shape or form, you normally have to understand what's the questions the person's going to answer and predict those in advance so you can shape a conversation path. In this case, I'm asking it simple questions like, who is the DFT? And it points me and it understands the acronym. It points me at content of the website. I then continue the conversation, what careers are available. It then points me at particular places on that website again. And this is something I built in a few minutes. The opportunity here now is that we can kind of expose the interface to anybody on the front end of the technology using what we're all built to do, which is speak and understand in our natural base language. So here is a simple example of asking questions of a website without me as the author of that tool to be able to have to predict the questions they're going to ask. Another example I built was using TfL. For anybody based in London, you'll be familiar with the ULEZ. I actually put this together before the ULEZ expanded out in London middle of last year. And again, I would go to the website. I could plug my vehicle number plate into their tool. It would tell me if my vehicle was compliant. But again, I've simply pointed it at their website just as a simple example, and I can again start to ask questions. So in this case, I'm asking about the ULEZ. I don't have to sort of describe the meaning or intent. It can actually understand and interpret based on what I've kind of pointed it at. And now I can ask to start questions of it. And I'm keeping in context. So I'm now saying, how much is it? I'm not repeating my question, how much is the ULEZ? It's kind of maintain the context of that conversation as I continue. The other interesting thing is, as we understand these learning models and how they operate, they actually start to grade quite a broad understanding. So I've asked it a particular geographical question here. Will it affect me in a particular point in London? And it actually points out, based on its grounding on that website, that the ULEZ was at that point in time expanding. So would I be impacted by that? And again, I can ask it questions where I might be choosing to move location. So if you think about how you might deliver services today, we're all used to providing a web-based front end, but how can we keep the context of that conversation to answer as many questions as possible in the flow of this conversation thread? So now I've asked it, do I need to change my car? And it actually is doing a check in the background without me having to leave this thread to then check if my vehicle is compliant. So if you think about any scenario where you want to keep the person in the context and flow of that engagement with your particular service, how can you then continue to feed and answer questions as quickly as possible, almost like a first-time fix, or generate the responses to those questions in a short amount of time as possible? So that's a simple example there. Another example I wanted to talk about was a startup organization you might have heard of called Wave. They're an autonomous vehicle company based out of London. And what they have been doing using the same technology is generating what they define as world models. So in this case, Gaia 1 was a model that they released last year. This idea that they can actually, again, through a description of a particular environment, create and generate video content as though it's been perceived or viewed from the perspective of a car. So that video has been generated off the back of a prompt. So it's not recorded traveling along a particular street. And now they've got to a point where you can ask it and change the weather conditions, change what the vehicles are doing on the road. All of these videos have been generated. They'd never existed before. It's not real streets in London. So that's, if you think about the applications of this, if you can now generate fictitious world environments, what's the opportunity to train vehicles or other modalities by using this sort of technology? And that gives an increasing number of opportunities and examples, because instead of having to send a vehicle out onto every single road, you can do a whole load more potential training in this example. Obviously, they're an autonomous vehicle company that's working to enable vehicles to drive themselves around UK streets. And now they've also generated this example where they can generate real world examples and change the scenarios to test how vehicles might react to those different world conditions. Just to kind of set a perspective here, this is a video they released on the left back in June 23, and a video compared to that in September 23. And you can see the definition difference. If I hadn't explained that the video on the right was generated by AI and not generated off of a camera in somebody's front dashboard, you would question, actually, is that a real video or not? So the definition increase has been quite large in a short amount of time. The other piece here, and we're not going to obviously walk through in all this detail, and in my 20 plus years of working in technology, I've never had to go to the research papers that's coming out to understand what the capability of these models are. This is one example that was released last year. It's using an example in the top left here of taking a photo out of a real world vehicle into a particular location. The model has been asked to describe what is in that particular picture. And so it correctly says, I see a nighttime scene, I can see a person walking across the road. But in the prompt, it also just says, what do you plan to do next, essentially? So make an assumption about what will happen or what your behavior will be following this particular picture. So it identifies that that person is crossing the crosswalk, and it will come to a complete stop if I haven't already, and make sure that it's safe to continue. Again, in the top right-hand corner, it's a similar situation around a nighttime scene. You're behind the wheel. What do you plan to do next? And again, it's behind a vehicle. Brake lights are illuminated. There's a pedestrians with people walking across the road. So the interesting thing here is, again, it's another example where giving of picture input, historically, we would have had to have trained to understand every single object in that picture, but now using these models that sit underneath this, the vision model, which is referred to underneath as GPT-4V, it's now able to actually produce results that are potential to surpass existing autonomous vehicle systems in certain scenarios in understanding image recognition and decision-making processes. So it's really becoming a fascinating idea where how can we now think about not just text generation, picture, video, audio generation, we can also in reverse understand and interpret content passed to it, which include video, audio, text, content, to start to build into our process of automated decision-making processes. A simple example, again, might be, I built a quick example for TfL around lost property. Using a mobile phone to take a picture of an object, it can quickly identify the object, classify it, automatically populate it into a back-end system to save time for the individual. So we're really in this exploratory phase now about what does it mean to use this technology and where do we see the application of this within our day-to-day roles. I'm going to play another short, quick video just to jump back to Lucy, just to really emphasize from a transport perspective where the benefit has already been seen last year.
Behind me is a London Tube map, and I'm completely blind. I'm going to take a picture with Be My Eyes, and AI is going to tell me what route to go on the tube. I've never done it before. Let's see if it can. Let's take a picture. I'm at Heathrow. How do I get to Tottenham Court Road? Ask questions. It could be really crazy if this does this. I'm kind of nervous to see what it does.
Based on the images you have sent, I can see that you are at Heathrow Airport and you would like to get to Tottenham Court Road. The best way to do this is to take the Heathrow Express train from Heathrow Airport to London.
I can't can't believe I can take a picture of a sign and it will tell me where to go. Like, if you told me 10 years ago when I lost my vision that I would be standing here with a guide dog doing this, I would not have believed you. I have my autonomy back. Like, I just need to take a picture of a sign. And that is what I used to be able to do, just glance at it when I was sighted, and now I can do that again because I've got my iPhone, I've got Be My Eyes.
Yeah, it always makes me emotional, Andrew. Could you not put that one on?
It's powerful. I think it's interesting how it's really creating new opportunities and really empowering people that were potentially disadvantaged before. So in the context really of our slinking, when we've kind of looked back, we've kind of understand where technology has come from, a little bit of where the opportunity is. If we jump forward now and see what is one example where we could see this technology go.
This is work.
What's up, Mike?
We're giving eyes and ears to AI. So the world becomes your prompt and your interface. This is work. Working. These are thoughts happening.
Hey, Copilot.
Plans populating.
Copilot, when was this last replaced?
Information gathering. Instructions guiding. Schematics aligning. People connecting. Problem solving.
Copilot?
Hey, Copilot. Copilot.
This is confidence growing. Eyes widening. These are questions.
I just finished. Copilot, what's next?
Rotate the engine block 90 degrees.
Questions the way you ask them.
Please get me the detailed view of the optical cable layout.
Never too many questions.
All right. Let's highlight the relay switches.
Go ahead. Keep asking.
It's in position. What's next?
Keep learning.
The hydraulic filter was changed 6 months ago.
Okay, can you pull up a service record?
Copilot, what's the tolerance of this locking ring?
Here is a copy of the last service record. The tolerance is 9/1000 of an inch.
Remind me where this fits into the assembly.
Step 4, align the spindle. The locking ring is highlighted.
This is work getting smarter. This is work working better. This is work working. This is work making sense of the world around you.
Copilot, let Ruth know that I'm finished and close out the work order.
This is AI for the front line.
So it's really just a perception of where we think this might go. So the idea that we can now interact using natural language with a computer system and ask it to do actions on our behalf. And in that example, comparing VR headsets, so the idea of using a HoloLens or an Apple Vision Pro, for example, where they're mixing the virtual world overlaid with the physical world and then asking questions of the computer system to do things on your behalf, whether it's recalling information without having to pull up your mobile phone or tablet in the context of a particular role. This idea that the key thing is interacting and asking questions of the computer to do things on our behalf using natural language. So if we come back to today and we think about how you might be seeing this surface up, certainly from a Microsoft perspective, we describe this idea of Copilot. We're quite clear, and we truly believe that this AI technology is really here to assist the human. So if you keep the idea that the human is always in the loop of the process that you're doing, it's about how we can think about moving this idea where we've seen in the media, in the news, in the mainstream film industry of perceiving AI in a certain way, that we're actually not building technology that's designed to operate it on our behalf from autopilot, but the idea that we're moving to this idea of Copilot, using the computer system, the technology to assist us in our everyday role. And that is a key thing we kind of want to emphasize when we think about what are the opportunities for how we can use this technology today. When Microsoft sort of came to market earlier last year, late in 2022, after ChatGPT came to market, we first released alongside Bing this concept of Bing Chat, where we can interact using the same technology, but on top of a search engine technology to allow us to search for information. More recently, that's kind of been fully rebranded into what we describe as Copilot. And Copilot is something that's available to everybody across 169 countries. You can go to copilot.microsoft.com. There's now an app you can install free of charge on your iPhone, on your Android device. And that allows you to gain the benefits of using that chat GPT-like interface to ask questions and do things on your behalf in a very capable way, leveraging the latest models that's available. For anybody interested, we've just made it available using GPT-4 Turbo underneath inside now Copilot. And when you go to the site and when you use the tool, you'll get an option of 3. There's creative mode and then 2 others. I would generally recommend sticking to a creative mode if you want to ensure you're using the latest model. But you can use that, sits on top of AI-powered search, and you can use that on any device for any purpose you might choose to use it for. And then we have this concept for organizations and enterprises, this additional piece around Copilot, which we call commercial data protection. So if you were to then log into, and has been enabled by your Microsoft 365 administrator, you can enable free of charge this enterprise version of that Copilot-like chat. And that ensures that any interactions with the service is then, it's your data. We don't train off that information. We have no sight of how you use that tool, but it can be enabled across your organization free of charge. So that's a key way of then starting to understand and labeling all of your employees within your organization to understand what's the opportunity of how we can start to understand how this can be used in the context of each of our individual roles. Then on the far right, we also announced last year and became generally available in November, which is Copilot for Microsoft 365. And this is where we're now embedding this technology inside of your Microsoft 365 Office environment, where you can have direct embedding within Outlook, within Word, within Excel, within all your Office suite, on top of your organizational data that we refer to as the Microsoft Graph, to then be in the context of your workflow, really improve the way you work, whether it's summarizing the emails you've received in your inbox, creating a brand new draft from a blank page around a particular document you might need to create, taking a recent document you've created and converting it into a set of slides on your behalf. This idea, we're now bringing that ability to create and generate and summarize new content, but in the context of your everyday work. And when we bring this all together, it really ensures that you have access to your corporate information, which is entirely your data. We have no sight of it, but it brings that richness of that large language model interaction inside of your everyday working environment. And I've got another short video, just it's a bit of context.
Whoa. Straight to the top, never going down, don't wait for the drop. Stand still, that's the motto, yeah. Brand new bands for the auto, oh. Foot to the ground, full throttle. Big energy for the night like lotto. Y'all talk lots, never this quiet. Life like a Seinfeld plot. Vault full of songs, all of them bombs. Something like a minefield guy. Boom. Get it, tickets running out quick. Bet it, never get it out big. Said it, never had to shout it. They said I couldn't ever do it, okay, how's this? Fit a week worth of work in a minute. Machine well oiled, you know how I stay efficient. To-do list written, I do this different. Hold up, wait a minute, I ain't finished. Look, flows the same now. Paved the way to snakes and fakes are chased out. Back to back to back, I changed the pace now. Had to stack the cash until the bank's out. Straight to the top, never going down, don't wait for the drop.
So I've got again, to kind of visualize that a little bit for you, this concept of Copilot and where you can see it today, which includes inside Windows 11, inside your Edge browser, and obviously anybody can access via copilot.microsoft.com. And even we've just announced that we're sticking an AI button on the keyboard for new devices going forward to make it even easier to access. But this is another short video just to kind of help you visualize how you can use it today.
To get started with Copilot, you go to copilot.microsoft.com. Here you can shop, code, analyze, create, plan trips, and more. And when you sign in with your Entra ID, commercial data protection is automatically activated. Here, chat data isn't saved, Microsoft has no eyes-on access, and your data isn't used to train the models. Now on to Copilot for Microsoft 365. To do that, you just switch the toggle from web to work. This Copilot experience will completely change the way you work. You can ask Copilot to figure out where to start your day. With a simple prompt, you can get an overview of where you're mentioned to see what projects need your attention and list 3 things to prioritize. It combs across your business data to give you a summary organized by emails and chats and suggests what to prioritize. And of course, it includes citations so you can quickly verify and cross-reference the results. We've integrated Copilot right into Windows, so each of these Copilot product experiences are also available to you right from your taskbar.
So, and I'm watching the chat, and there's some really good questions coming through, but I thought I'd just pick one. Obviously, this is a really brief introductory kind of overview to kind of set the scene, and I've focused a lot on this idea of ChatGPT, because it was the kind of first service that came to market. But what it's actually done, it's actually enabled a huge ecosystem to become exposed and become much more in the visible mind of many people in technology, now creating these different models for different purposes. So this idea that we've got these huge computational rich, expensive cloud-hosted models that are generating the power behind these large language models that sit in that cloud platform, we're actually getting to a point now where we can use the larger models to generate much more specific and much more purpose-driven smaller models. So if you think, what's the opportunity for driving this technology, not just for an internet-connected device, but down locally onto a disconnected device, even a mobile phone or edge device or something that may be roadside, that is kind of where this technology is rapidly already changing shape. At the Ignite conference, which is Microsoft's large event, which takes place once a year, typically towards the autumn-winter months, there was a particular model that's been released by Microsoft Research as one example called Phi-2. And it's basically taking this idea of how we improve the richness of the data that's inputted. So the idea that we give it really rich human information and knowledge in the context of textbooks and other material. But what it did, it actually used the larger models like GPT-4 to generate synthetic data to allow it to train the smaller models. And we've now got a model that I can actually run locally on my laptop, run it completely disconnected, and in the same way, ask it questions and have a conversation and use it to reason, rationale, summarize in the same way. So we're getting to a point where we have this richness of space to understand where this technology can be used in many different contexts. But the reason I kind of went through that brief example is just to kind of show you this is coming to market really quickly. And from a broad spectrum view, from a Microsoft perspective, it's coming into every product that you use today. And we'll touch on the skills question later on as well. This idea of how do we become more familiar with it? How do we understand its implications in my own individual role? And the idea really, how can I improve at a task level what I do in my particular perspective? But the core question underneath all of that, and I've got it on screen here, is when we think about what, the responsible side of AI. This is great. This technology is doing all these wonderful, fantastic things. We're very much biased by some of the movies that we see in the mainstream media, and this idea of, what is the future of how this AI will go forward. We're very clear about how we have built a responsible AI model, which underpins everything that we do around this technology. So we want to ensure that it's built responsibly and ethically in terms of how we train it and how we control its biases and how we make it available in fairness. And we want to ensure that we're thinking about all these other perspectives. What's the security aspect of how the data underlying these models is considered, and how do we serve society more broadly when we think about empowering everybody, every person in every organization on the planet to achieve more. These six key principles I've got on screen briefly here. The great thing is there's a huge amount of documentation that we can kind of point you at. I'm looking forward to the 23rd of January, where I'll be happy to meet anybody in person for a follow-up conversation. Because again, this is really kind of a thought idea of a purpose for this session. How do we get you understanding very quickly a broad perspective of what AI means? But this is a really important topic that really needs a good level of understanding. And again, AI is only really built on good data. So when we think about how do we maximize the insight we can drive with our organizational assets, we need to think about the constructs of how we manage that data, bring it together, put the appropriate security controls around the data itself, and then AI has an opportunity to become really impactful and powerful. From a global perspective, regulation of AI is across the agenda. Just before Christmas, the US put out an executive order. In Europe, they were passing through their AI legislation through Parliament. It's a constant narrative here in the UK and globally. So it's an agenda item. When we even at Bletchley Park the UK hosted last year as well, this idea that front and center, how do we really understand? Because there hasn't really been, in my mind, a technology innovating at such a pace that we need to really think about its implications. Microsoft has a clear view on that, and those six key principles are foundational to how we talk about responsibility across AI. I've got another quick short video just to kind of set the scene that the Treasury released last year.
If we're going to fulfill our ambition to be the world's next Silicon Valley, then we're going to need a lot of compute power. People who access ChatGPT in the UK will access it through the computers in this data center here.
Every era of technology requires a huge investment in infrastructure. There is no government moving faster than the government in the UK in terms of bringing the infrastructure of the future here. And when you combine that with our kinds of private sector investment, that's where you, I think, really start to see the future come together.
So obviously underneath all of this, there's a huge amount of infrastructure required. If you kind of watch the stock markets, if you watch the technology press, you would hear organizations like NVIDIA producing the GPU, the silicon that can power a lot of this inference of on top of which we run these AI models. But then it kind of knocks onto other questions that we can cover off in some of the questions. What's the implications if we continue to build out more data centers, more compute power on the sustainability side of this? What's the to and fro? What's the other perspectives we need to think about to ensure that we're thinking about all these different perspectives when we think about the impacts of AI globally and the opportunity it brings, as long as some of the other considerations alongside it? So to kind of come to a wrap up on the slides here, again, it's kind of giving you a very quick flavor from across what you might see on your social media, what you see in everyday press, what you can now experiment with directly on your own devices, what you can think about with inside your own organizations. But the key thing here is there is no nice, tidy rulebook on the shelf that describes all the opportunities where these things can sit. And the other piece to that is it's a new technology that sits on a well-bedded history and stack of other technology that you can use in tandem with it. But fundamentally, we need to think about the data that underlies all of this that allows the AI to be really impactful and effective. I've got one last video, just a bit of a thought-provoking piece here. The first time Microsoft had sight of the GPT-4 model, which was released to the public in March last year, and is, for all intents and purposes, is still a leader in the space in terms of its capability and our understanding of its opportunity. But this short video is an interview with Bill Gates, the first time he was exposed to the GPT-4 model back in the summer of 2022.
They said, yeah, let's schedule this thing. And so in early September, we had a pretty large group over to my house for dinner. I think maybe 30 people in total, including a lot of the amazing OpenAI people, but a good-sized group from Microsoft. Satya was there, and they gave it AP biology questions and let me give it AP biology questions. And with one exception, it did a super good job. And the exception had to do with math, which we can get to that later. But it was stunning. It was mind-blowing. After the biology questions, I had them type in, what do you say to a father with a sick child? And it gave this very careful, excellent answer that, was perhaps better than any of us in the room might have given. And so it's like, wow, what is it? What is the scope of this thing? Because this is way better. And, then the rest of the night, we, ask it historical questions about, are there criticisms of Churchill or different things? And it was just fascinating. And then over the next few months, as I was given an account and Saul Khan got one of those early accounts, the idea that you could have it write college applications or, rewrite, say, the Declaration of Independence the way a famous person like Donald Trump might have written it. And it was so capable of writing, writing poems, give it a tune like Hey Jude and tell it, to write about that, tell it to take a Ted Lasso episode and include the following things. Anyway, ever since that day in September, I've said, wow, this is a fundamental change, not without some things that still need to be worked out, but it is a fundamental advance. And it's confusing people in terms of, well, it can't yet do this, it can't do that, it's not perfect at this or that. But hey, natural language is now the primary interface that we're going to use to describe things, even to computers. And so it's a huge, huge advance.
Thank you. So that ends the presentation for this morning. I'm now going to just turn off my screen share, and Michelle will walk through some of the questions that have been asked before the session, as well as some of the questions that have been raised through the session.
Yeah, no problem. I have been answering a few of those as we've been going. I'm halfway typing one back to Andreas, so apologies. I'll finish that off in a second. So quite an active Q&A. We've got 20 questions still open, a few that I have answered. I suppose I think the approach is probably best. We've got plenty of time just to go through them one by one and see how far we get and everything. We have outstanding. I would definitely encourage you to come to the event on the 23rd if you haven't already registered, because it's not just Microsoft in the room, obviously. You will have a whole lot of industry advisors there to answer some of your questions. But anything that is outstanding, we will try and come back to you. So the first one from Wee, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, is really about what we're seeing as transport based use cases. I think she landed that maybe a little bit before that video you did with that training model one. But when we are talking to customers, and you particularly, where are you seeing sort of this technology surface most in transport?
Certainly. So I think the key thing here is it's a technology that's suddenly appeared on everybody's radar within 12 months. So I mentioned when ChatGPT was first released back in November, that was the real first exposure to technology that's been floating around for 5 years or so. So in the technology domains, kind of people have been aware of it, but as soon as people had access to it, everyday users in all shapes of walk and life being able to play with this technology, it's opened up a huge new world of opportunity to understand where it can apply. Because of that such rapid shift and bring to market, it actually then means we don't actually have this great big kit bag of items that allow us to identify really powerful opportunities, other than there are some simple low-hanging fruit, if you like, where we can see, if you think about any situation you have at the moment where you're having a natural language conversation, whether that's some sort of citizen-facing service, or even inside your existing organization, maybe servicing the citizen, so from a contact center view, maybe. This idea of where we can expose knowledge to a contact center agent to summarize call transcripts to speed up the process of citizen engagement with an organization. But I always try to describe that every organization really has to understand and experiment and innovate this idea of how do we, at small scale, understand where we can experiment using this technology inside our organization to really understand how it applies to us. Because we all have very unique jobs and specializations, both individually and organizationally. And we have to understand how, in everyday examples, we can experiment with how this can improve particular parts of those processes. The simple example I gave there and the opportunity Microsoft sees is improving productivity for the everyday user of collaborative tools. So where we can speed up the process of responding to emails, collaborating with our colleagues. In an example like this, if I was on a call with my colleagues, we can have an automatic transcript taking place, summarize, generate the meeting notes and actions automatically off the back of that call. So it's all about improving the everyday activity that we do within our roles. But when we think about more specialized activity in the context of transport or a transport organization, we really have to understand its implications in our specific organization. So the great thing is this technology is easy, potentially easy to turn on and understand, but working with any of your sort of IT technology providers to work and understand how can we experiment in this small space with these individual users and the best place to do it is outside of IT in the business, because those business people will really understand the business process and the ways of working they have today. In the past, we might have thought about using Excel to do a way of collaborating on data, but actually there's greater, more powerful ways of doing that. But innovation and experimentation, because unfortunately there isn't one great big rule book. That rule book is increasing in terms of what's the opportunity, what's the use cases we can take off the shelf, but everybody is experimenting at this point in time.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting thing. It is what I'm seeing in customers is that this opportunity for innovation is something that they really are coming to grips with. Like, it's almost like anything is possible. You have to work through the use case to understand it in the context, particularly of the data you are accessing and how you want that to be surfaced and the interaction. So I love that you've landed that point around experiment. Ultimately it is a opportunity for all of us to interact in a completely different way with technology, and that opens up the window for so many more ways for this technology to be used. One of the questions that came in by one of the registrations as well touched on this a little bit. I think, things like creating more dynamic journey tools or applications, in-car navigation systems, being able to talk to them, all of those are now being considered by big players in the marketplace. So when it comes to transport, I think you guys are on the forefront of that and should be coming up with these and then speaking to your partners or testing these directly. The next one's coming from David. When I asked ChatGPT what it knew about me, giving my name and affiliation, most of the facts he used quotes for that, and the response were wrong, i.e. hallucinations. How do we recognize this and deal with it?
So the key thing to understand about ChatGPT is thinking it in the context of how we've been used to using a search engine. So a search engine has a huge amount of compute, scouring the internet, indexing anything that's publicly available. Then when you ask it a question, it will search through that information and point you at the destination to where you can find where it's found it. The difference here is with these large language models, it's not like it's got a large database of information. That's the key thing. If we took all of the publicly available information and stuck it in one place, it would be a huge volume of data. The difference here is it has been trained on it. It has been fed the information, and it's looked at it in a statistical way to understand how words and sentences have been formed in a very simple way, and what's the relationship between these words. And when I see a particular word, are there other meanings of words that might sit alongside that? So instead of searching for a cat, can I search for furry animal? Can I search for feline? And so this idea of semantic relationship between words, essentially the model is trained to understand language. So if you were to break open one of these models, there isn't a large database of learnt information like a database you could normally open up under a search tool. It's actually a model that's determining language. So therefore, when you ask it facts, while it may have learned patterns based on publicly facing information, it's not really doing real-time in search of that knowledge base. It's not pulling out a record of information about what it's learned. It's actually writing back from a probability point of view, how has this language been used before? So it can look like a very human-like response. When we talk about hallucinations, a different way to think about it is creativity. The idea when you talk to a human being, we're infallible or fallible creatures in the same way. The idea that we don't know everything, our mind changes what we answer, our perspectives are very different and individual. Again, we're really trying to understand how these models work, because we put content in one end and out comes the answer at the other end. And if you think about all these neurons of information connecting this information together internally, we're really trying to understand what that means. So in the same way, when you ask it a question, this concept it's not necessarily, well, we call it hallucination, but it's been creative. It's been creative in its response. So it's not necessarily factual from our point of view, but then it comes back to our view of it's designed to augment what we do. We're still the experts in that space. We need to clarify and use this tool and be the final respondent in how we use that information. The final piece to say is we have this concept of grounding or providing it context. So again, using the search analogy, we give it a simple few words to get a particular response. And we've kind of been trained over the past 20 years about how we interact with search engines. So we've kind of got good at using certain phrases to prompt it to respond in a certain way. But now we have to have a conversation with the system. And the more context we give it in advance of the question, the better the response can be. In the same way, if you met a stranger in the street and you walked up to them and asked them a question without giving any context to why you're asking the question, you're going to get a pretty rubbish response. But if you explain to them, this is what I want to know. I understand you're an expert in this space. This is information that I'm interested in. This is the format I'd like to understand. There are some other perspectives I'd like to see. All of that is context to the question. So the more context you provide, the richer the response you get. And remember, you continue that conversation with it. So it's not just question, answer, walk away. It's question, answer. Can you refine it? Can you give me a bit more detail? Can you expand that point? So it changes the way we now interact with the system.
Lovely. Thanks, Andrew. I've just realised we've only got 15 minutes left, so we're going to have to crack on there, buddy. So there's a couple of questions that have sort of been about, one from Richard: how do we know that the videos are realistic? How do we know that the content is genuine? That sort of where you started with some of that, the picture of the Pope and things was very obvious. Answer sort of what are our thoughts around that, sort of understanding content, whether it's come from being created, genuine, etc.
So there is this idea of how can we create watermarked content is one approach, and I think there is this idea of how do we detect content that's been generated by this technology. So there is a constant to and fro. Probably the best example is in the education space. When you think about school kids, college kids, people that are working, or students in that mind of having to create content in response to coursework, exam material, things that they're tasked with at school, they'll come home, they might ask ChatGPT or Copilot to write them some documentation. How does the teacher know whether it's being generated by AI or not? And is it the student's own work or just verbatim copy generated on their behalf? So that is a perfect example of where there is this tug of war between how do we modernize our education system and allow people to think about the benefits of using it in changing the way we educate versus detecting the source material in the first place. The reason why that's pertinent is because we are obviously thinking about the idea of content being created. How do we detect it? But actually, in the education system example, we should actually be changing the way we think about educating kids and children and students to use this technology as a tool and aid to create content, but the process of validating, recognizing, and utilizing that content is the same. They should be adoptive of the technology to think about how they can use it positively in the education space. The bigger question around how do you actually detect it, the reason I use the education example is because there's lots of organizations that have created new tools called plagiarism detectors or AI detectors. And the reality is they are very, very and highly ineffective. The reason for that is these models continue to iterate and improve over time. When you interact with a model and you ask it a question, if you ask it the same question the following day, you might get a different response. The reason is because it's referred to as a non-determinant system. So when you ask it a question in the same way that you ask a human being a question, they will not always give the same response the exact same way every time. So the challenge you have is how do you detect patterns of content that's been generated through these AI tools? And the challenge is, the reality is, all of these plagiarism detection tools are quite often very high false positive on real creative works. So there is no strict answer other than it's entirely recognised. And part of the reason for thinking about the responsible AI and the policy frameworks and the regulation around this is how do we ensure that at the root of the providers of this technology. So if you think about an organisation or any large tech organisation that's producing these models, we are providing inputs and responsible frameworks to ensure its responses are non-biased, are fair, are considerate, and therefore we're making sure the content is appropriate when it's produced on the output. In the context of video and art, there are some providers that are watermarking the technology, but it is a very active space to think about. This very active conversation space is reality. There's no hard answer other than an observation is plagiarism and AI detection tools are generally fairly ineffective and quickly outdated because the technology continues to innovate underneath.
Lovely, thank you. I've just been scanning through some of the rest of the questions, and I'm trying to sort of bunch them together for us. I think there's a lot of conversation on things like, you know, can AI predict? Right? Can it become sort of super intelligent and things like that? I mean, foundationally, you know, when you think about AI more generally and generative AI as well, it looks at historical information and then, you know, applies some intelligence to that based on what it's been asked to do. When you think about that in context, you know, a couple of the scenarios they talked about is public backlash on a change of speed in restrictions in Wales, for example. What are your thoughts on sort of this ability of the technology to predict, and how would you answer that question?
I think the reality it's less about predict, it's more about probability, which isn't really any different to how we've looked at these in the past. So when you bring data together and you spot patterns of information to make a decision, it's usually increasing the probability of a particular outcome. So these models are fundamentally predicting the words on the screen, the pixels on the screen, the audio signals, etc. So all that it's really doing, it's based on what its learnt information is, its large repository of his learnt information, it's then predicting the words and responses that's coming next. I mean, if you were to describe from your own perspective a standard data statistical approach of, you know, predicting an outcome based on richness of data sets that have been brought together, that is allowing you to make more informed decisions. I mean, how would you think about it from your point of view?
Yeah, so, you know, I think what is really interesting about previous and implementations of AI and current, if we think about it as a skill, its ability to analyze and review vast volumes gives it the ability to highlight, you know, and there was a question about data quality before. It gives this the ability for it to sort of highlight patterns and, you know, and sort of predict when things are going to come along based on the historical information. So, you know, I think when we are sort of considering it, it is not going to replace, and this I think is the really important thing, it's not going to replace the ability for intention. That's a human quality, right? Our ability to say, go and do this, check this information, this giving it intent is what we will continue to do. So there's a lot of debate, and I would say listen to podcasts around it. You know, I know you and I share this on a regular basis about how it will evolve. But at the moment, it is a technology that sits there waiting for you to ask it a question. And I think that's the important thing to think about. So yeah, a bit about, you know, understanding what the future holds. I think that is, you know, definitely up for conversation on the 23rd. And I would encourage you to listen and read widely, because there is a lot of thought from our leaders in government, from thought leaders, from research, from industry around this. So definitely invest in learning about its potentials and obviously what's coming around the corner. Let's have a look. Andrew, I think you've touched on this already, but you implied the selection of creative, balanced and precise doesn't just affect the style of the response, but also affects the engine used. Do you just want to touch on that a little bit more? And I'll have a quick look through the rest of the question.
If I read the question correctly, I guess the overriding element in all of this is how we phrase whatever prompt we're using with the system. So as I kind of touched on, if we are really blunt and short and we ask and we're not specific and we're not giving it context, you're not going to get, we will get a very generic type response. If I want to really apply some richness in terms of the response, and if you think about how you might apply it on top of data within your own organization, if you have got a set of information that's unique to your organization and you ask it to generate content using that grounding, it will then be able to understand the way that content has been written and use it in the way that it's able to apply a much richer response. A simple example is when we think about Copilot using Microsoft Outlook, we're introducing this feature called Sounds Like Me. So within Microsoft 365, there's something called a Microsoft Graph. So all of the organizational data you store, your documents, your PowerPoints, your slides, all of that information sits inside your 365 environment, but fundamentally it's accessible via the graph. It also contains who's shared what information, what data do you have access to, who you last spoken to, who you shared email with. It's a rich source of information. In Outlook, this Sounds Like Me feature will be able to take an email you've received. You can obviously summarize that email. You can click the summarize button. But when you come to write a new draft, what it will do, it will look at how you've written emails before, and when it produces that new content, write a new draft response for me, it not only uses the email you're responding to, it uses the way you've written emails before to provide a much richer response about how it should write that draft email. So it then starts to have the pattern of sounding like you in the way that you would normally phrase things. So the overarching all of this is the more context you provide, whether it's up front or through the conversation thread using Copilot Chat as an example, the richer the response you get back. And that applies when you're generating video content, picture content. Be descriptive, be clear, be directive. In the same way, when you're making an ask of another human, another person in your team, you're quite specific about what you want. You need to be specific with the system as well, and that will frame and describe and control and improve the outputs that you get back from the system.
Thank you. So I don't think we're going to make it through all the rest of the outstanding questions.
I think 1 till 12 actually.
Oh, is it? Oh, okay. I thought we were finishing at 12 and at 45. Sorry about that. If we've got extra time, can someone just pump that into the chat? Because I thought we only had till 11:45. One of the things Tom raised, and obviously a topic very close to my heart, is, and you mentioned it in your presentation, is, oh, thank you, we've got till 12, brilliant, we'll carry on then, is quality of data. AI requires good data. So we can have a long conversation about this, but do you want to sort of summarize that a little bit and I'll jump in?
Yeah, at a very high level, and I'll simplify this because you're gonna have a much richer response. But if you think about any organization, you will have various different systems of data, and those systems of data are typically what we describe as siloed. So if I stick all my information into this database for this particular application, that data is inside that system. At the same time, again, referring to 365, if your organization has been around like any of ours, you will have years and years of documents, versions of documents, some things you might have downloaded, some things that are old and out of date. You might have acquired another organization, you might have merged with another organization. You almost have this giant heap of data that sits across your organization. So you've now got pockets of information that are siloed that nobody can access apart from a particular application. You've got vast amounts of data that potentially a portion of it is valid and current and the rest of it is out of date. So the question then thinks about how do we, if we really want to benefit from AI, we need to bring data together. So we have this idea of how do we connect these data sources so that we can ask questions of it holistically rather than ask them independently and get a different perspective on those data. But at the same time, how do we clean it? How do we cleanse it? How do we think about the maturity, the life cycle, the aspects of making sure that our data is current and valid? Do you want to kind of add a bit more color?
Yeah, for sure. So again, it comes back to what is AI? You know, AI is a tool that fundamentally sits on top of data and does things with it, and depending on what you've commissioned it to do. So, you know, working with local authorities for years, this has always been a challenge. And actually, every government organisation I work with, it has always been a challenge on how do they manage the quality, even understand their data at a very basic level. So, you know, foundationally, that challenge still needs to be addressed. Putting AI over the top of it isn't going to fix it. It might be able to do some things that make it easier to identify poor quality data. I answered a question about that earlier. And Tom, you asked about rogue information. So, you know, it can say, well, these things don't match, so which is right? So I think those tools are really helpful, but ultimately understanding what data you want to point at it and making sure that you have identified the data of quality in your organization is foundational. And I suppose it ties a little bit back to the previous question about when I used GPT to search on myself, it came up with a whole lot of stuff, right? If I search on my information, you know, it doesn't tell the whole story. So I think it's just an example of, you know, when you apply these tools to data that isn't complete, you will get variable results. And that is something that you just have to think about and plan for and make sure that data is improved organisationally. But we recognise that's a big commitment and also involves cultural change. Next question is, let me just go to the top beef here. Okay, what do you think, it's from Sam, what do you think is the criteria baseline infrastructure to support the growth of AI solutions, i.e. data, seamless digital connectivity, privacy laws? So an interesting one. What do we have to join up to make this AI work for our organizations? Spoke about data.
Yeah, I mean, it always comes back to data. So the other thing to mention, we probably haven't made clear, is AI is not going to suddenly expose what you don't already have access to fundamentally. So the key thing is it's an intelligent layer that we're sticking on top of data. If it's bad data or it's not very good, the responses you're going to get will be representative of the quality of the data underneath. But you're really building the security foundations. Who can access it? What's the governance structure? Who can access this within your organization? And the same rules probably apply when you think about what is our organizational stance around the adoption or use of AI technology within our organization. So in the same way you think about and make decisions on how you use any sort of new service capability, whether it's cloud-based or on-prem, you want to understand its framework, its structure, its rules, its base. So the starting point for anything is how can you be organizationally confident that you are in a position to start to experiment and use these, as well as understand and decide which of those tools you are feeling comfortable using.
Yeah.
From a Microsoft point of view, we're quite clear around whatever tools you're using. We provide all of the guidance, the principles we operate, the service frameworks we work and align to, through something called the Service Trust Portal. So if you choose to use any of those services, you can kind of look up and see how we manage those services, what adherence and frameworks and guidelines and accreditations do we work to, how do these services work, what's the flow, and when you use this service, where does my data sit, how does it used? So all of those sort of foundational questions you need to really come to terms with really quickly, because the key thing here is it's such a fast, rapid movement in terms of technology innovation. You can't really sit on the fence and think, can we spend the next 6 months understanding it before we start to understand how it fits inside our organization? You really need to come to a much faster review process to start to iterate small and be confident in experimentation, because this has rapidly shifted even in the past 12 months, and it's continuing to. If you were to go into any social framework online and start to unpick and lift the lid on who's looking at this technology, there are now hundreds of different types of models that are being investigated to understand the opportunity that these can provide, whether it's specialized models in the context of medicine, or specialized models in the context or general purpose models in the context of much more broader perspectives. The reality is, if you wait 6 months, it will be a different story again. And the product availability from all organizations will be a different landscape again. So it comes there is obviously it can easily be a very complex topic, but I think the question to have is your organization, how do you get your organization into a comfortable state that you can start to understand and use it? Because if you don't, and you don't provide that guidance and framework, it's likely there's a high percentage of people in your organization that are already using it, but they're just not using it inside your organization, personal devices, home environments or whatever. They're already being exposed to it. It's a bit like the iPhone effect. I think when the iPhone first came out in 2007, it kind of shifted all of our gaze into a mobile computing device. Devices existed before it, but it was a compelling point that shifted all of our focus into the way we now have a handheld computer in every pocket. And if organizations didn't provide it, then people will still want to use and adopt and learn the technology, but you need to capitalize on that. And everybody's interested to understand what's the opportunity with the organization. So how do you become organizationally comfortable and ready to start to experiment with this technology?
Yeah, I think that definitely, if I think about the comments you made earlier about be prepared to innovate, and innovate on this technology, test with it, do that in a safe space with, data sets that are, secured and all of that. But ultimately, to Sam's point, it's about having the policies, the people, and actually the clarity from the partners that you're working with to make sure that whatever you do is appropriate for your organization. And it is a digital service, so ultimately connectivity is going to be required. There was a few that I was just having a look at that sort of touch on applying GPT in geospatial or three-dimensional ways. Clive made comment about, VW incorporating GPT into its vehicles. And someone else made a comment about geospatial a little bit further down. Yeah. Interpreting geospatial data does seem to be a particular challenge for LLMs. And do we have anything to share on that?
So I think my initial response is this isn't suddenly an all dancing solves every problem solution. There is lots of much more capable technology depending on the use case. And I think that's probably a good example where it's already you've already got capable geospatial systems that are capable of understanding and manipulating geospatial data. Whereas this is very much a model that's non-deterministic, because you expect to, we've always expected computer systems to be 100% accurate 100% of the time. And in these cases, it's a different example of where we're now using it in a different context, and the responses may vary. But actually, in the human mind sense, it's actually providing helpful responses because it's much more human-like. I think the VW example, if I'm not mistaken, is again probably around the audio assistant interaction with the car example, which is probably an easy win use case for any sort of situation where you want to provide a natural language interface. So now we don't have to determine we don't have to have certain keywords that have to be said to transact with the system. We can now understand intent through the use of complex language with the system. So that I think will get to a point, and I've tried to avoid use the wording like Star Trek, but if you think about talking to computer systems in that TV show, the idea where you can just describe your intent. Even if you look at, and I watched a video just yesterday, the Star Trek replicator as a simple example, but think in today's context of a 3D printer. If you were to go out and buy a 3D printer, it's quite complex to go and find a 3D model that then you can bring onto that device to then print in a physical form on that printer. But if we now switch it out and have a natural language interface to that 3D printer and say, I want this item, and I give it context and describe it in the same way you've seen video and audio generated through natural language, we can now generate 3D physical objects through a 3D printer. We're starting to apply what is sci-fi into real world possibility. So the big shift change is that natural language interface. The rest of it is a bigger conversation. There's a huge stack of capability that we can interact, we can integrate, and fundamentally it's a big box of Lego blocks that we can build together to solve a particular challenge. And generative AI provides some new blocks in that kit.
Yeah, for sure. Agreed. And I do feel sometimes we are in that situation as generative AI is the answer. What is the question? And ultimately, it is not. It is not going to solve every use case as you've highlighted. But I do think there is the opportunity to use it specifically in transport use cases in quite an advanced way. I think Timothy Lemieux highlighted sort of the ability for it to sort of perceive surrounding environments and process that at a very high rate. I think you demonstrated that in that model for training, creating a digital environment for training purposes. So I think there's some really interesting things there. Can you yeah, I suppose in the last few minutes, or minute or two really, because we probably have to close off. Any other really specific transport use cases that we're seeing, Andrew, that we want to just highlight for closing comments? Anything we sort of seeing being really exciting and new?
I think there's an awful lot of experimentation going on. I think that's the main thing. If I think about, and I gave a few examples because if I think about myself as a citizen, and there was another question in the chat about improving that experience, how do we make our service more attractive? If you need to make it frictionless in terms of how you can use your particular service from a citizen point of view. So if you think about, I mean, I have an electric car. I have, depending on where I want to charge it, I might have 50 different apps to charge it. And then if I go to my local train station, I might choose my local train operating provider's app, or I might use, an aggregation app, or there might be other ways of me managing my service through different transport apps. The opportunity is, how do we bring these different disparate sets of data together that's held by different organizations to provide capability that improves the citizen experience to make it as frictionless as possible? So I think there is no simple answer other than we have the capability, the technology, and the opportunity to really improve the way we think about an integrated system that improves the benefit to the citizen of utilizing those services front and foremost. Because I think if we can make the service as frictionless as possible, we improve customer satisfaction, we improve efficiencies, and we improve insight. I think the opportunity and knock-on effects of just trying to solve for the citizen perspective can solve a whole lot of other challenges. I try to think about not always thinking about the organizational focus as the primary. It should be that we exist to deliver a really great compounding service for our users of that service.
Yeah.
And that will have knock-ons. What's your last perspective on that?
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think my first opportunity just to jump into the chat, and I've noticed sort of some of the other speakers that are joining on the 23rd will have joined today. So I think this conversation absolutely needs to continue. I'm really excited to be there on the 23rd. We will try our best to answer some of the questions that are left outstanding, but ultimately, you know, I think this is a fantastic opportunity and something that only has really occurred in our history a handful of times. So, you know, whatever we can do to come together and think about how we can make the most of this technology sort of paradigm shift for our customers, I think is really important. And we're all beholden to ask the questions, challenge each other, innovate together and share. So really looking forward to meeting everybody on the 23rd. Andrew, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Thank you very much for Landor giving us the time to share today, and see you all on the 23rd.
Thanks all. Thanks, Michelle.